The far north of Europe is shaped by long coastlines, deep forests, and wide stretches of open land. Scandinavia is not a place of sharp edges or sudden changes, but a landscape that unfolds slowly. Mountains rise gently in the distance, softened by snow and time. Rivers move quietly through valleys, and countless lakes rest between trees that seem to stand without hurry. The land feels spacious, giving the sense that there is always more beyond what the eye can see. The climate shapes everything here. Winters are long and dark, bringing silence and stillness that can last for months. Snow covers the ground like a blanket, smoothing the world into simple shapes. The cold air slows movement and encourages patience. Summers, though short, arrive with a calm brightness. The sun stays low but lingers in the sky, stretching daylight and giving life a steady rhythm rather than sudden energy. This environment encourages reflection. Wind moves across open fields, waves tap gently against rocky shores, and forests absorb sound. Life in the north is guided by nature's pace, not urgency. The land teaches people to observe, to wait, and to adapt. In this quiet setting, the mind can slow down, resting easily within the vast and peaceful world that surrounded the earliest Viking communities. These conditions quietly shape habits, expectations, and values, forming a background where survival depends on awareness, cooperation, and respect for the land itself. This calm foundation supports the story that slowly unfolds next over time, naturally. Life in early Scandinavia followed a simple and steady rhythm shaped by the seasons. Each day began with attention to basic needs: food, warmth, and shelter. Families rose early to tend animals, repair tools, and prepare meals using what the land and sea provided. There was little excess, and nothing was wasted. Every task, no matter how small, played a role in survival. Homes were modest structures built from wood, turf, and stone. Inside, life gathered around a central fire that offered heat and light. Cooking, mending, and quiet conversation happened in this shared space. Children learned by watching adults, slowly absorbing skills through repetition rather than instruction. These routines created familiarity and comfort, even during harsh weather. Work was divided but shared. Men, women, and children all contributed according to ability. Fishing, farming, weaving, and gathering were not separate professions, but parts of daily life. During winter, activity slowed. People repaired clothing, told stories, and rested when possible. During summer, long daylight hours were used carefully to prepare for the coming cold. This way of life encouraged patience and cooperation. Survival depended on trust within the community and respect for nature's limits. There was reassurance in routine and safety in knowing one's place. The simplicity of early Scandinavian life offered stability, grounding people in the present moment and allowing the mind to settle into a calm, predictable flow. This steady existence helped reduce fear, soften thoughts, and create a quiet sense of belonging that felt reliable each day, gently. Community was the quiet center of early Scandinavian life. People rarely lived alone, instead forming small villages where families stayed close to one another. These settlements were built with care, homes placed within walking distance so help was never far away. Familiar faces, shared spaces, and repeated routines created a sense of safety that went beyond physical shelter. Family ties were strong and extended beyond parents and children. Elders were respected for experience, while younger members learned through observation and participation. Meals were often shared, stories passed gently from one generation to the next. These moments were not dramatic, but they carried meaning, reinforcing trust and continuity. Work was rarely done in isolation. Fields were tended together, boats pulled onto shore with many hands, and repairs completed as a group. Cooperation was not only practical, but expected. When challenges appeared, illness, harsh weather, or poor harvests, the community responded together, easing fear and uncertainty. Belonging came from contribution. Each person mattered because each person helped. This shared responsibility created warmth without noise or celebration. Life felt steady, supported by familiar rhythms and dependable relationships. In these villages, people knew where they stood and who stood beside them. That knowledge allowed the mind to relax, settle, and rest comfortably within the gentle presence of others around them. This quiet bond shaped identity, encouraged calm cooperation, and gave daily life a reassuring structure that softened worries and allowed people to feel deeply connected to one another across generations in lasting, peaceful ways. Over time, small signs suggested that this quiet world was not meant to remain unchanged forever. People noticed patterns in the sea and sky, shifts that repeated themselves year after year. Boats returned with unfamiliar objects, pieces of metal, new tools, and stories carried softly from distant shores. These details did not disrupt daily life, but they lingered in thought, planting gentle questions. Young people listened closely to travelers and elders alike. They learned about rivers that led far inland and coastlines that stretched beyond familiar waters. Curiosity grew slowly, not as restlessness, but as awareness. The world felt wider than the village paths and nearby fields. Even so, routines continued, steady and calm, grounding each day. Seasons still arrived on time, and work still needing doing. Yet beneath the surface, confidence was forming. Skills were improving, boats becoming stronger, navigation more reliable. Experience built quietly, layered through years of repetition. No single moment announced change. Instead, readiness settled in gradually, like the return of light after winter. This sense of waiting carried no fear. It felt natural, almost peaceful. Life had provided stability, and stability allowed people to imagine more without urgency. The land, the sea, and the community had prepared them. When movement eventually came, it would feel like a continuation rather than a disruption, guided by patience, familiarity, and trust shaped slowly over generations. This quiet anticipation rested gently in daily life, unnoticed yet present, allowing minds to stay calm while possibilities remained distant and unspoken nearby. The word Viking did not originally describe a single people or nation. Instead, it referred to an activity, a way of moving through the world for a time. In early Scandinavian languages, the word was connected to travel by sea, especially journeys that involved trade, exploration, or occasional conflict. To go Viking meant to leave home for a season, not to abandon one's identity forever. Most people living in Scandinavia did not think of themselves as Vikings every day. They were farmers, parents, craftspeople, and neighbors. The label applied only when someone took part in voyages beyond their local lands. This understanding softens the image often associated with the word. It was not a permanent role, but a temporary path taken by some at certain moments in life. Over time, outsiders began using the word more broadly. Communities along distant shores grouped all northern travelers under a single name. Gradually, the term grew larger than its original meaning, shaped by stories, fear, and memory. What began as a description of movement became an identity defined by others. Understanding this helps bring the Vikings closer to everyday human experience. They were not born into a role of constant action or conflict. They stepped into and out of different parts of life, guided by circumstance and choice. This flexible identity allowed them to adapt, blending home and travel, routine and change, without seeing themselves as separate from the quiet world they always returned to when journeys ended. Daily life for most Vikings centered on work that felt familiar and steady. Farming was the foundation. Fields were cleared carefully, crops planted with attention to short growing seasons, and animals raised for food, clothing, and labor. These tasks required patience and planning rather than force or speed. Success depended on observation and cooperation with nature. Alongside farming, trade quietly shaped Viking life. Coastal villages exchanged goods with nearby communities, sharing tools, food, and materials. As experience grew, these exchanges extended farther. Simple items traveled from hand to hand, moving across rivers and seas. Trade encouraged curiosity and connection, allowing people to learn about distant places without leaving home. Sailing tied everything together. Boats were not only for long journeys, but also for fishing, transport, and local travel. Time spent on the water was familiar, calm, and practical. Navigation relied on experience, memory, and natural signs rather than urgency. The sea became a pathway, not a boundary. This balance between land and water created flexibility. People could remain rooted while still feeling connected to a wider world. Life was not defined by one role alone. Farming brought stability, trade brought awareness, and sailing brought possibility. Together, these elements formed a complete way of life that felt grounded and capable, allowing movement to grow naturally from everyday experience rather than sudden ambition. Order in Viking society was maintained through shared values rather than constant authority. Honor was central, not as pride, but as reliability. A person's word mattered. Trust built slowly through consistent behavior, and reputation followed individuals throughout their lives. This encouraged fairness and restraint, helping communities remain stable. Law was not distant or hidden. Disputes were settled in open gatherings where voices could be heard. These assemblies, often held outdoors, brought people together at regular times. Decisions were made through discussion, listening, and agreement. While disagreements existed, the process itself offered reassurance. Problems were addressed calmly rather than ignored. Rules were remembered and passed down through speech and example. Elders played an important role, guiding conversations with experience rather than force. This created a sense of continuity. Even as generations changed, the structure remained familiar, offering predictability. Justice aimed for balance instead of punishment alone. Restoring harmony mattered more than winning. This approach reduced fear and helped people feel secure within their community. Knowing that concerns could be raised and resolved allowed daily life to continue without constant tension. These systems supported cooperation and trust. They reminded people that they belonged to something larger than themselves. In this calm framework of honor and shared responsibility, individuals could live with confidence, knowing that order existed not through control, but through collective understanding and steady communication over time. Over generations, familiarity with the land and sea slowly built confidence. People understood their environment deeply, knowing when to plant, when to sail, and when to wait. This knowledge created stability, and stability allowed curiosity to grow without fear. Looking beyond home did not mean rejecting it. Instead, it came from feeling secure enough to explore. Population changes and limited resources also played a quiet role. As families grew, land became harder to divide. Rather than causing conflict, this encouraged practical thinking. Travel offered opportunity without urgency. Short journeys became longer ones, guided by experience rather than impulse. Stories shared by traders and sailors added gentle motivation. Tales of rivers that led far inland and coasts with unfamiliar shapes sparked imagination. These accounts were not dramatic calls to action, but calm invitations to learn more. Over time, routes became known, risks understood, and confidence strengthened. Exploration felt like an extension of daily life. Skills learned at home applied elsewhere. Boats built for fishing carried people farther. Knowledge of seasons guided travel. Movement unfolded naturally, step by step. This gradual shift allowed the Vikings to expand their world without losing their sense of balance. They carried their values, routines, and calm understanding with them. Home remained central, even as horizons widened, making exploration feel steady and familiar rather than uncertain or rushed. The Norse people imagined the world as a living structure, balanced and connected rather than distant or abstract. It was not a single flat place, but a layered space where everything had a position and purpose. The earth was seen as part of a wider system, held together by natural order and quiet balance. This view helped people understand their place without needing precise maps or written explanations. At the center of this world was the human realm, familiar and grounded. Around it existed other spaces, not far away, but gently removed, like neighboring rooms rather than unreachable heavens. These realms reflected different forces of life, growth, struggle, rest, and change. Together, they formed a complete picture of existence that felt stable and reassuring. Nature played an important role in shaping this worldview. Trees, rivers, mountains, and skies were not separate from belief, but part of it. A great tree was imagined to connect all realms, its roots and branches stretching quietly through everything that existed. This image was simple, organic, and easy to understand, even for children. Rather than overwhelming the mind, this structure offered comfort. It suggested that life followed patterns and that even unseen forces had order. People could move through their days knowing the world was held together by balance, not chaos. This gentle understanding allowed belief to blend smoothly into daily life, resting quietly in the background, guiding thought without demanding constant attention or fear. The gods of the Norse world were not distant or perfect beings. They reflected the same struggles, strengths, and limits that people recognized in themselves. This made belief feel familiar rather than intimidating. The gods worked, failed, learned, and aged just as humans did. Their stories were less about control and more about understanding life as it truly felt. Each god represented aspects of everyday experience. Some reflected strength and protection, others wisdom, patience, or creativity. These qualities were not extreme or unreachable. They were the same traits valued in family members, leaders, and neighbors. By seeing these qualities in divine form, people could better understand them within themselves. The gods were also connected closely to nature. Storms, seasons, and fertility were explained through personalities rather than forces. This approach softened fear. A storm was not random destruction, but part of a larger story. Change became easier to accept when it was seen as purposeful. Stories about the gods were shared calmly, often during quiet evenings or winter nights. They were not lessons enforced by fear, but reflections offered through storytelling. People listened, absorbed meaning, and applied it naturally to their own lives. This human quality of the gods allowed belief to feel supportive rather than demanding. Faith became a quiet companion, helping people understand their emotions and experiences without pressure, guiding thought gently while allowing the mind to rest within familiar patterns of meaning. Fate held a central place in Norse belief, but it was not seen as harsh or punishing. Instead, it was understood as a steady flow of time, moving forward regardless of effort or resistance. Life unfolded along a path shaped by both choice and circumstance. This understanding helped people accept uncertainty with calm awareness. Destiny was not about control, but about acceptance. People believed that certain moments were meant to happen, just as seasons change and tides return. This belief did not remove responsibility, but it softened fear. Knowing that not everything could be changed allowed the mind to release worry over what lay beyond control. Time itself was viewed as circular rather than strict and linear. Events repeated in patterns echoing earlier moments. Birth followed death, growth followed rest. This rhythm created reassurance. Even loss was seen as part of a larger cycle, not an ending without meaning. Stories of fate were shared without urgency. They reminded listeners that effort mattered, but outcomes were not always theirs to command. This balance encouraged patience and humility. People focused on living well rather than avoiding the unavoidable. By accepting fate as a companion rather than an enemy, life felt steadier. Worries softened, and attention returned to the present moment. This belief offered peace, allowing individuals to rest within the flow of time, trusting that life moved forward with purpose even when its direction remained unseen. Death in Norse belief was not surrounded by fear or mystery alone. It was understood as a transition, a movement from one state of being to another. Life did not end abruptly, but continued in a different form. This belief helped ease anxiety and allowed people to face loss with quiet acceptance. The afterlife was imagined in gentle terms. Some believed in peaceful resting places where souls gathered, while others viewed it as a continuation of familiar existence. These ideas were not fixed or rigid. What mattered was the sense that life carried on in some way, shaped by how one had lived. Death was spoken of openly, without secrecy. It was part of life's natural rhythm, like winter following autumn. This openness reduced fear and made grief more manageable. Remembering the dead through stories and shared memory kept them present in daily life. Rather than focusing on punishment or reward, belief emphasized balance. A good life was valued for its honesty, effort, and care for others. These qualities were thought to follow a person beyond life, shaping what came next. This calm view of death offered reassurance. It reminded people that endings were also beginnings and that nothing truly disappeared. By seeing death as a peaceful transition, the mind could rest more easily, comforted by the idea that life flowed onward in quiet continuity. The Viking longship was a quiet achievement, shaped by experience rather than invention alone. It was built to move smoothly across water, light enough to be carried over land when needed, yet strong enough to face open seas. The shape was long and narrow, allowing it to glide forward with little resistance. This design reflected patience and observation, refined slowly over generations. Wood was chosen carefully, shaped by hand, and fitted with precision. Each plank followed the curve of the ship, creating flexibility instead of stiffness. This allowed the vessel to respond gently to waves rather than fighting against them. The result was a steady movement that felt natural, almost calm, even during long journeys. The longship was practical. It could travel rivers, coastlines, and open waters with equal ease. Oars provided control when wind was absent, while a simple sail carried the ship quietly when conditions allowed. There was no need for complex systems. Everything served a clear purpose. These ships were not symbols of power to those who built them. They were tools, trusted and familiar. People depended on them for fishing, trade, and travel long before distant exploration became common. The longship represented confidence earned through repetition. It allowed movement without haste and travel without fear. In this way, the ship became an extension of daily life, carrying the calm rhythm of home across water, connecting familiar shores with new horizons gently and without urgency. Travel for the Vikings relied on awareness rather than speed. Navigation was guided by careful observation of the natural world. The position of the sun, the movement of stars, the shape of coastlines, and the behavior of birds all offered quiet guidance. These signs were learned slowly through experience passed from one generation to the next. There were no strict routes marked on maps. Instead, memory played an important role. Sailors remembered currents, landmarks, and the feel of the water beneath the ship. This knowledge created confidence without pressure. Journeys unfolded gradually, allowing time to adjust and respond. The weather was respected rather than challenged. When conditions were uncertain, people waited. When winds were favorable, they moved. This patience reduced risk and kept travel calm. The sea was treated as a partner, not an obstacle. Navigation tools were simple. A basic understanding of direction was enough when combined with awareness and trust in experience. There was comfort in familiarity, even as distances grew longer. Travel became a natural extension of daily life. Short journeys prepared people for longer ones. Each voyage added understanding rather than exhaustion. Movement was not rushed, and arrival was never forced. This approach allowed exploration to grow without stress. People felt capable, not daring. They carried the same calm mindset from land to sea, trusting the rhythms they had always known. Navigation became less about reaching a destination and more about moving steadily within the flow of nature, allowing the journey itself to feel safe, measured, and quietly purposeful. As Viking journeys extended outward, encounters with other communities became more frequent. These meetings were not always dramatic or sudden. Often, they began with cautious observation, followed by exchange. People watched, learned, and adjusted, guided by curiosity rather than aggression. Different lands offered different customs, languages, and tools. These differences were noticed carefully. Trade allowed communication without words as goods passed between hands. Silver, cloth, food, and simple objects carried meaning and value. Through these exchanges, understanding developed slowly. Not every meeting was peaceful, but conflict was not constant. Many encounters involved cooperation, shared work, or temporary settlement. The Vikings were adaptable, able to learn from those they met while retaining their own customs. Over time, familiarity replaced uncertainty. Routes became known, expectations clearer. People recognized patterns in foreign lands just as they did at home. Rivers, markets, and ports formed connections that felt reliable. These encounters widened perspective without removing a sense of belonging. Vikings did not lose themselves when traveling. They carried their routines, values, and habits wherever they went. Home remained present in memory and behavior. By approaching others with observation rather than urgency, interactions remained balanced. The wider world became less unknown and more approachable. Through steady contact, Europe became a connected space, shaped quietly by repeated meetings that felt human, measured, and grounded in mutual awareness rather than sudden change. Over time, some Viking journeys extended into longer stays. Settlements formed not through force alone, but through adaptation and cooperation. People chose locations that felt familiar, near water, fertile land, and reliable resources. These new homes reflected the same patterns as those left behind. Blending with local populations happened gradually. Customs mixed through shared work, marriage, and daily interaction. Language softened, traditions adapted, and routines adjusted without urgency. Rather than replacing existing ways of life, Vikings often added to them. Farming continued, trade expanded, and communities grew together. Differences remained, but they were managed through familiarity. Over generations, these blended societies felt stable and ordinary rather than foreign. The process was quiet. No single moment marked the beginning or end. Change unfolded slowly, allowing people to remain grounded. Identity expanded without breaking. These settlements demonstrated flexibility. Vikings carried their skills and values into new spaces while learning from those already there. This balance allowed continuity amid change. By settling rather than constantly moving, people created lasting connections. Home became something that could exist in more than one place. This understanding reduced fear of the unknown and reinforced trust in adaptation. Through settlement and blending, movement transformed into belonging. The wider world became less distant, shaped by shared life rather than separation. This calm integration laid the foundation for deeper connections across regions, allowing history to move forward gently, supported by cooperation and patience rather than disruption or haste. Over time, the world around the Vikings began to shift in quiet but noticeable ways. Trade routes grew busier, kingdoms elsewhere became more organized, and borders slowly took shape. These changes were not sudden or alarming, but they altered the rhythm of travel and exchange. What once felt open and undefined gradually became more structured. Information moved more easily between regions. News of laws, rulers, and alliances traveled along the same paths as goods. This growing awareness encouraged adjustment rather than resistance. People learned when to move carefully and when to stay close to home. Flexibility became an important skill. At home, daily life continued much as before. Fields were still worked, boats still repaired, and families still gathered. Yet there was a growing sense that the wider world was becoming more connected. Choices carried different weight, and actions reached farther than they once had. This changing environment did not remove stability. Instead, it invited reflection. People considered how to preserve familiar ways while responding to new realities. Tradition and adaptation existed side by side, shaping decisions quietly. The Vikings did not experience this change as an ending. It felt more like a turning of seasons. What had worked before slowly gave way to what was needed next. Through patience and awareness, they navigated this shifting world with the same calm attention they had always applied to land and sea, allowing change to arrive without fear. Raiding, once a part of the Viking movement, gradually became less central to daily life. As regions grew more organized and defenses stronger, the risks increased while rewards diminished. Over time, this shift reduced the need for southern journeys and temporary conflict. Many Vikings had always seen raiding as seasonal rather than permanent. It was one path among many, not a defining identity. As opportunities changed, focus returned more fully to farming, trade, and settlement. These activities offered stability and long-term security. Trade became more reliable than conflict. Agreements replaced uncertainty, and familiarity replaced surprise. Goods moved through established routes, reducing the need for force. Cooperation proved more useful than confrontation. This transition happened quietly. There was no single moment when raiding stopped. Instead, it faded naturally as conditions evolved. Skills once used for raids were applied elsewhere, in navigation, craftsmanship, and organization. The end of raiding did not mean loss of strength. It reflected maturity and adaptation. Vikings adjusted their choices without abandoning their values. Confidence remained, now expressed through stability rather than movement. By shifting focus, communities preserved calm and continuity. Life slowed, routines deepened, and the sense of home strengthened. This change allowed the Viking world to settle into a quieter phase, one guided by patience and practical wisdom rather than urgency, helping people feel secure within a world that had grown more familiar and connected over time. Even as the Viking Age faded, its influence remained woven into many parts of the world. Language carried traces of Scandinavian words, especially in places where Vikings had settled or traded. These words blended naturally, becoming part of everyday speech without notice. Skills and knowledge also endured. Shipbuilding techniques, navigation practices, and craftsmanship influenced later generations. These contributions were practical and lasting, shaping how people traveled and worked long after the age of exploration ended. Trade exchange left marks that were subtle but enduring. Traditions, stories, and customs blended across regions, creating shared heritage rather than division. The Vikings did not vanish from history, they became part of it. Even their approach to law and community influenced local systems. Open discussion, Shared responsibility and respect for agreement left impressions that extended beyond Scandinavia. These ideas settled quietly into new societies. The legacy was not one of constant motion, but of connection. Vikings helped link distant regions, making the world feel smaller and more familiar. Their influence continued through daily life rather than dramatic memory. This lasting presence shows that impact does not require permanence in one form. By adapting and blending, Vikings ensured their influence would remain without dominating. Their legacy rests in quiet continuity, carried forward through language, tools, and shared experience that still echo gently across time. As the Viking Age drew to a close, life settled into familiar patterns once more. Movement slowed, and communities became rooted. The energy that once carried people across seas now supported stability at home. This return was not defeat, but completion. The world had changed, and so had the people within it. Experience gained through travel and contact enriched daily life. Knowledge was preserved, not lost. Stories continued to be told, now with a sense of reflection rather than anticipation. Home regained its central place. Fields, villages, and coastlines became the focus again, offering reassurance and continuity. The calm rhythm of work and rest returned fully, allowing minds to settle. The Viking story ends not with collapse, but with quiet integration. Their way of life blended into the wider world, leaving traces without disruption. Their transition felt natural, guided by patience and acceptance. This gentle ending invites rest rather than excitement. It reminds us that history moves in cycles, rising and settling without hurry. The Vikings lived, explored, adapted, and finally rested within the flow of time. As their story fades into the background, it leaves behind a sense of calm completeness. Nothing feels unfinished. The journey reaches a peaceful pause, allowing the listener to relax fully, carrying forward the steady rhythm of life that shaped the Vikings from the beginning, now resting quietly at the edge of memory and sleep. Long after the Viking Age had passed, its presence continued to echo quietly through time. These echoes were not loud or dramatic. They appeared in small details, familiar words, shared customs, and inherited skills. Generations later, people still carried traces of Viking life without always knowing their origin. Stories survived in softened form, passed down and reshaped by memory. What once described real journeys and real lives slowly became legend, then history. Yet, even as facts blurred, the sense of endurance remained. The Vikings were remembered not only for where they went, but for how they lived. Their influence spread gently, settling into the background of daily life across many regions. Place names, tools, and traditions became part of local identity. These elements blended so naturally that they felt native, not foreign. This quiet continuation shows how history lingers. It does not need constant attention to remain present. Instead, it lives on through repetition, habit, and shared understanding. The Viking story became part of a larger human story, one that continued to unfold without interruption. In this way, the past remained close. It did not press forward demanding recognition. It rested calmly behind the present, offering depth without weight. These echoes remind us that history does not disappear when an era ends. It simply settles, becoming part of the world we move through each day. As time moved forward, the Vikings shifted from lived experience to collective memory. Written records, songs, and stories captured fragments of their world, preserving moments rather than full realities. These memories were shaped by those who told them, colored by distance and imagination. What remained strongest were impressions rather than details. Courage, movement, resilience, and adaptability became central themes. These qualities resonated across generations because they reflected universal human experiences. In this way, Viking memory stayed relevant without needing accuracy. Memory softened sharp edges. Conflict faded, while perseverance endured. The harshness of life in the north transformed into images of strength and endurance. This transformation allowed the Viking past to feel approachable rather than distant. Over time, memory became symbolic. The Vikings represented exploration, independence, and connection to nature. These symbols carried meaning beyond historical fact. They offered comfort and inspiration rather than instruction. This shift from history to memory allowed the Viking story to rest. It no longer demanded explanation or defense. It existed as part of cultural understanding, shared quietly and revisited gently. Memory works slowly. It selects, reshapes, and settles. Through this process, the Vikings found a lasting place in human awareness. Their story became something people could return to calmly, without urgency, feeling connected to a distant past that still felt familiar and reassuring. Today, the Viking world remains present in subtle and meaningful ways. Museums, landscapes, and traditions quietly preserve what once was. These reminders do not recreate the past fully, but they offer connection. Standing where Vikings once lived or sailed invites reflection rather than excitement. Modern interest often focuses on understanding rather than spectacle. People seek to learn how Vikings adapted to their environment, built communities, and navigated change. This curiosity feels calm and respectful, shaped by distance and perspective. Language continues to carry traces of Viking influence. Everyday words used without thought link the present to the past. These connections exist quietly, woven into daily life. The land itself also remembers. Fields, coastlines, and waterways still follow the same natural rhythms. Though centuries have passed, the environment remains familiar. This continuity creates a sense of timelessness. What remains today is not an image of constant movement, but one of balance. The Vikings are remembered as people who lived within nature, responded to change, and valued community. These qualities continue to resonate. Their presence today feels gentle. It invites thought without pressure and curiosity without urgency. By remaining part of the world in this quiet way, the Viking story continues to offer calm insight into how people once lived, adapted, and found meaning within the steady flow of life. As this journey through Viking history comes to rest, the story settles into stillness. The movement, exploration, and adaptation that once defined an era now belong to the past. What remains is a sense of completion rather than conclusion. The Vikings lived in balance with their world, responding to its demands with patience and skill. Over time, they changed, adapted, and eventually blended into broader societies. This transition was not abrupt or forced. It followed the same calm rhythm that guided their lives from the beginning. History often feels busy and complex, but this story offers a different feeling. It reminds us that change does not always arrive loudly. It can unfold gently, guided by time rather than conflict. As the details fade, the feeling remains. A quiet respect for nature, a steady approach to life, and a willingness to adapt without losing identity. These qualities linger, offering reassurance rather than instruction. Now the journey slows fully. The mind no longer needs to follow paths or timelines. It can rest within the calm understanding that everything has found its place. The Viking story does not demand attention. It allows release. With the past settled gently behind us, there is space for stillness. The rhythm softens, thoughts slow, and the story drifts quietly away, leaving only a sense of calm continuity where history rests peacefully and the present moment feels steady, safe, and ready for sleep.